Hello, Paul Hayward and everyone at home. This is another in our occasional series of podcasts, talking to people who are expert in their field and working with AI in the real world. So today we're very lucky to have Paul Hayward with us to discuss AI, fundraising and the charity sector. You'll remember that we spoke to Anthony Fawkes about data in the third sector as well. So really learning and kind of leaning into what is best practice, what is it you need to think about, and how do you get the most out of the tools that are out there. So there's a lot of text on this slide, which is probably rubbish. Shouldn't have this much text, should I, Paul? There's way too much. It's out of control. But the key points are Paul Hayward is the Director of Business Development at Engaging Networks. Engaging Networks, I'm sure you can tell us a bit more about the platform overall, but generally considered rock stars of the UK fundraising and advocacy platform scene. You've previously held a list of really big positions at a who's who of UK charities, and also worked on delivering new and emerging and innovative ways of fundraising throughout the course of your career. So it'd be really good to understand just how AI taps into that. Before we get into the meat of it, I have to ask you, have you seen anything recently that you're just like, AI, that's it for me? We call it AI, don't believe it. What have you seen that's just blown your mind?
So I think Google's AI summaries, which are notoriously bad at the moment. A colleague sent me a screenshot a couple of weeks ago of Google's AI confidently proclaiming that Dolly Parton was older than sliced bread. And telling us that 1946 happened before 1928. So there are some great AI fails out there that you've got to be careful of at the moment.
It's that thing is like 2 + 2 = 4, apart from when it equals banana.
Exactly.
What's going on there? That is cool. I quite enjoyed the entire world looking like a Studio Ghibli render, which in a way, wouldn't that be better for everyone if it was a kind of gentler age? Okay, cool. Like, we can't just have fun. We should do some work. What I wanted to do was, as we got you for about an hour, I think a lot of people that we've spoken to in the third sector kind of have this moment of, we know AI can do a ton of stuff, but we're not sure how to get started or what to do with it, or kind of work through. In that situation, how do you kind of advise people, or what do you think people should go to first?
Sure. I think one of the big risks around AI at the moment is just going off and finding tools independently, or having staff go off and find tools independently, and potentially, create issues around data breaches, or create problems for the charity when creating content using generative tools, things like that. So I think charities, when they're starting out, would do really well to identify a tool that they want to begin to use that fits well with their tech stack. Looking at how that can be used, and doing some risk assessments around it, putting a policy in place. It doesn't have to be anything too heavy, but then just allowing staff to start making use of something like Copilot if you're using the Office suite, just to begin dipping your toe into the world of AI, but doing it in a controlled way, and in a way that isn't going to come back to create problems for you in the future.
That sort of measured use, making sure it ticks the box. I mean, that was interesting when we were talking about data, kind of ensuring that you've got the data protection and the cybersecurity, a sense of the impact, the data protection impact assessment, and the qualities impact assessment is also another good one to kind of run through. And then I think you've really hit the nail on the head with, it needs to align with what you're trying to do as an organization overall. And there could be tools there that you're using anyway that kind of fit the bill. You kind of, I think kind of where we look at charities, and, with Ant, we were talking about the data side across service delivery and also fundraising. I think with your kind of fundraisers hat on, with what you've kind of seen and the lay of the land as it stands, is there anything that you've seen and you're like, this is pretty much textbook what it should be using for?
So I think if we split into two kind of types of fundraising, so looking at kind of my background is very much in mass market fundraising, and I think the real opportunity there in the short term is around predictive AI. The issue with generative AI at the moment is it's very common you see hallucinations, and you get information out of a generative AI tool that maybe doesn't quite say what you want it to say or talk about your organization in the right way. Predictive AI tools, though, give you the opportunity to do things like segment your audience in ways that even a very large charity with a big database team and analytics people wouldn't be able to do. One of the things that we do at Engaging Networks is we can segment AI by the emotions that can drive people to give or to take an action.
Wow.
And fundraising, especially talking about kind of lower value mass market fundraising, is often an emotional response. So
Yeah.
I think there's some really powerful things that you can do if you do all of the work around data protection, the DPIA, and you're right to pull out things like the Equality Act and the requirement to treat people equitably in the same ways. If you can cover those bases, I think it can have a transformative effect on your fundraising.
Yeah.
And you can do things like if you can get the right tone and volume of content produced, you can do things like treat every donor like a major donor. You can create things that feel really tailored, really personal, and therefore have much more of an impact and can raise you a lot more money. I think when it comes to higher value fundraising, there's also some great opportunities there. When I was a director of fundraising, one of the problems that you used to frequently come across was doing things like trust updates, talking about how money was being spent. And I think there is more of the kind of flexibility around using generative tools to put kind of impact statistics into a tool and get a really nice commentary out to give somebody a report, maybe a smaller trust. If you don't have the time, you don't have the staff capacity, a much more kind of a much more high quality piece of feedback that will then hopefully allow you to build a great relationship with the funder, and then hopefully in the future access more money out of them, which is obviously the goal for every fundraiser. But broadly, in the longer term, there are some really exciting things that can come down the line with generative AI as that improves. The chance to be even more personalized, the chance to give people really, really tailored supporter journeys that can be unlike anything that a fundraiser can deliver at the moment. And then, more broadly thinking of things like services, I was shocked, actually. I think the stats last year were that nearly 70% of charity employees had tested an AI tool, but only 4% of charities were looking at using AI in their service delivery.
Yeah.
And when you think about charities, the kinds of charity I used to work for, are often medical health charities. As I mentioned, the last one was R&ID, and we used to give people lots of advice on hearing aids. And that was a service that was available 9 to 5 when we had, staff able to man a service desk. But all of the nuts and bolts, the basic information about things like hearing aid care and maintenance, that's readily available. And you can see that AI chatbots and things like that could build transformative services out that could be available 9 to 5, could be available 24 hours a day, in multiple languages, to a much broader community. And when you're thinking about building that kind of tool, there's something really compelling there for funders to go and really put some serious money behind and fund something that could be genuinely transformative for a charity.
Yeah, that is such a good point. I think when just kind of thinking back on a couple of things you kind of called out there. First off, the way that there's a huge amount of work that can be done across the board outside of fundraising, but in fundraising, it can really help accelerate and deepen that engagement that an organization has with its audience, but not in a not to a one to many, but in a many one-to-ones. And I think that's just such a lovely idea. But also that idea that this work, because it's new, because it's innovative, and it actually can help drive the service, that funders would be interested in supporting that endeavor as part of the wider mission, which I think is a point, that's a really good point that's often missed. What would be really interesting, I think, would be that idea, you were just talking about the emotional, being able to use AI to understand the emotion that helps drive kind of like fundraising. Can you just break that down a bit to kind of let us know how that works?
Yeah, sure. So we've spent probably about 5 years now at Engaging Networks, or at a sister company called Accessible Intelligence, looking at AI and looking at how AI models can help improve response rates, retention rates, and kind of things like, donation amounts. And one of the things that does have a dramatic impact, which you'd expect it to have, is the emotional tone of an email. So we've spent time classifying emails by emotional tone, and training an AI to identify the emotional tone in email communications and other communications that people receive. And then obviously what we can do as we build a data set up is we can begin to measure the response individuals have to the different emotional tones used by charities in their normal comms. And as we build up a picture of what people respond to, we can begin to tailor segments by the emotion that people tend to, click through or donate to. And then, we can, at the moment, kick this back to your team and say, we think you should write a panel of emails with a range of emotional tones. And then we can send, we can pair the right individual with the right emotion. And that's what I mean. I think that's kind of where we are today as not just as a charity sector, but I think in terms of how AI can be used responsibly. But I think as we become more sophisticated and as generative models work better, we'll be able to start taking, base content or content that an AI is recommended, and we'll begin to tailor, broader messaging, the body copy of email, things like that, based on emotion. So for a smaller organization, you might do something like just tailor by subject line, because that's quite a quick change you can make. But that's today. I think the next step starts to be tailoring the body copy, imagery, things like that, based on these recommendations that you can get out of these predictive models.
This is the sort of thing. It feels like a real evolution of that sort of principles of A/B testing and everything that people are kind of been doing, or I always find certainly want to be doing, but it's hard sometimes to come up with all the ideas with all of the different variations and stuff like that. So being able to use AI to kind of shortcut that process, I think, is really, really great. It also feels like with that and personalization, this new technology is actually allowing more of that human connection, that sort of emphasis to be drawn out. With kind of the piece of you've mentioned smaller charity a couple of times, and I think there's a lot of tools out there, some of them quite big, some of them quite meaty, and sometimes it's also, I guess, in charities of all sizes, making the case for using these tools and kind of understanding it. But if you were sat in a smaller charity and thinking, right, I love what Paul's talking about, kind of, is it trying to demonstrate it with a difference in fundraising targets? Is it trying to use this technology and just to explain how it works, broadly speaking? What kind of, like one good action, next best thing would you kind of jump into?
I think one of the things that used to make my job very easy as a fundraiser was that you had hard numbers that you could report back to a board or to SLT or SLT colleagues. And so one of the useful things about doing this in a fundraising team is that you can begin to kind of communicate fundraising uplift and things like that back to people very quickly. And as these tools mature and more organizations can demonstrate the kinds of uplift that they're getting, the business case becomes far easier to write. If you've got some good case studies, if you've got people who've seen a reasonable percentage uplift in giving over 12 months, it becomes a very compelling business case for a board, especially at a time when fundraising is difficult and people are looking to kind of maximize money from the audiences that they've already got in a lot of cases. I think in terms of starting out today, if you're not able to demonstrate kind of an income uplift, it's thinking about what your charity's priorities are, right? And if, for example, there's a big issue that you're campaigning on, beginning to think about how you can maximize the impact of your campaigns, putting some decent KPIs in place, and then maybe doing some test and learn work that might require some kind of manual legwork to demonstrate a case. But that can then lead to, you know, money becoming available to buy a tool that can make your life a lot easier and a lot more efficient, while delivering those kind of results for you kind of at the same time.
Yeah. So I think with that as well, it seems that AI is pulling together a lot of things that we've perhaps done more manually or thought about doing in different ways before. There's one element that I think maybe we kind of scooted over a bit in terms of the way that you have an audience of donors. Often they're kind of, you know, they're supporters, they're donors, they're people who believe in the same cause and they want to give. This technology, it seems, is able to look at them in a new light and kind of resegment them based on other things. And that seems tremendously powerful and something we're at the starting piece of. So, you know, you have the classics of donation amount or frequency. Now we've got things like emotion, which again is kind of like that's tomorrow's world stuff for those of us who kind of came up at a slightly older vintage. Are you seeing other sorts of things based on trends or historical data being used for forecasting, or even just being able to understand statistics faster so you can tweak things in real time?
I think that's the other big thing that, you know, charities and businesses can really use AI to help them with. You know, I think looking at every job, there's kind of boring manual pieces of work that you do that you'd kind of rather not be doing. You'd rather be doing kind of, you know, what you applied for the job for. But you kind of you have to do it, and it involves a lot of time, typically in Excel spreadsheets. I used to do a lot of budgeting in Excel spreadsheets, and I think that there's tools that firstly can help you, you know, get rid of a lot of the manual intervention there. Especially when it comes to kind of multi-year forecasting and looking at things like attrition rates, which can be difficult. But I think the other piece of it is, you know, as you start to generate results as you move through a financial year, AI is really good at summarizing what's going on. It's really good at looking at the data and suggesting where there might be issues that you want to focus on. And so, you know, I'm a trustee at St George's Hospital charity. We spend a long time looking at papers and summaries of papers as trustees pertaining to different areas of performance. And I think there's a real opportunity around things like summarizing data, summarizing papers, that can save everybody time, including staff, and staff can get back to, you know, what you pay them for. If you're a fundraiser, you want to be out raising money. You don't want to be sat there writing, you know, a board report. So I think there's a significant kind of batch of tools that are already available that you can use to make that aspect of your job, you know, far more tolerable. But also it'll make you a better fundraiser or a better campaigner or a better HR person at the end of the day, because you'll be doing the actual job, not reporting on it.
There's a great phrase, use AI for tasks, not taking jobs. And I think that kind of ties into that bit of it. And also this sort of idea that you can focus on the higher value work instead of, you know, just kind of do it. The tasks that take a lot of time, but are not the glamorous part. And we've all got them in our own role. Yeah. I guess one of the things that we've found is we've kind of started rolling out different sorts of training. We do a leadership, an AI course, which is working with the senior team or the board or something like that. We've recently launched a mini MBAI, which works with anyone who's kind of like mid to mid-senior in their career, who wants to develop the sorts of frameworks and strategies to use these tools to deliver on what it is that they do, but whatever that it is. With the charity sector and kind of that workforce out there of people who are used to delivering digital change, who have been at the forefront of communications for, you know, some decades now, what sort of skills and training do you think third sector professionals need, and how do you think that's changed or changing?
So I think firstly the charity sector in a way is split between charities that did a kind of digital transformation and missed the original digital transformation that was going on when I started out in the sector kind of 10, 15 years ago. And I think we're about to embark upon kind of another digital transformation, which is driven largely by AI technology. And we're doing that at a time when charities are squeezed hard in terms of finance, and so they can't afford to staff up or to pay, people to come in and help them do that. So I think it's incumbent on all charities really to go out and to think about how they can train staff in how to use and deploy these technologies, firstly in ways that probably make them more efficient, so that they can free up some of that staff time, and to consider how they can use these technologies to make every pound you spend that little bit more effective, a little bit more efficient, because it's, at the end of the day, it's donors' money and you don't want to waste it. But also we don't have the access to budgets that we probably had 5-10 years ago. So we need to think about how to do more with less, and I think AI has come along at a time when it's certainly possible to do that. But the risk is the charity sector, or areas of the charity sector, misses that transformation. So I think there's training you can access, there's people you can speak to who are experts in digital transformation, and they're really worth engaging at the moment. Or if they're speaking at a conference or doing a webinar, attending and thinking how you can deploy that, thinking what training you can access to help you do that kind of work. So I really do fear that areas of the charity sector will be left behind if they approach kind of the coming change in the digital landscape in the same way that they did probably 10 years ago, when they kind of just sat there thinking advertising on Facebook should be free, why do we need to pay for it? When that kind of mentality was very, very pervasive in the sector.
It sounds like canny investment is something that's needed to kind of get the most out of it, leaning into staff and letting them lead the way, I think, because they're the experts here. Okay, controversial question. Everything that you've just said, do you think we are going to see some giant killers, some smaller charities who use this stuff just smarter than the big guys, and that kind of leads to a shift in the market overall and how we look at fundraising in the UK?
Absolutely. I think one of the beautiful things about being a small charity is that you can be nimble, you can be agile, you can think about the way you deploy these things and do it quickly. Whereas, bigger organizations are slower. There's layers of process, layers of leadership and management. So I think there's a real opportunity, probably more so for smaller charities, to deploy these technologies in ways that make them more engaging, that make them more human, that create better connections, that steward supporters better. And that gives them the opportunity to grow. And we see, I think the example I've used for years now is Refuge, and the way that they've approached the marketplace, both in terms of using their campaigning advocacy program, but using it to drive fundraising. So it's created this kind of transformative growth plan there. And I think that charities can look to kind of similar ways of deploying tools in really agile, really quick ways, thinking about how they can make the use of the tools as effective as possible, to achieve whatever outcome they want to achieve, and can see these kind of transformative growth, this kind of transformative growth in like supporter files, donor base, advocacy impact, or just in the way that they're managed, the way that they go about their day-to-day business. And there's a real opportunity there, I think, for small and nimble organizations.
That you can kind of see how it could change the landscape a bit.
Absolutely.
It's I think kind of that idea of also like using it for the objective that you've got in front of you as well, because we've seen a lot of volatility in terms of how the technology works and what it can do, what it can't do, and it's rapidly evolving. And I think that idea of using it to achieve that strategic aim of increasing the donor base, or kind of like average donation, or whatever it is that you were trying to achieve, kind of future-proofs you to the extent that if it does all change, you've done something good with it, and it's not like this big monolithic, megalithic sort of thing that's kind of been rolled out. The way that you've kind of thought about introducing AI via accessible intelligence is something that I think kind of has a real collaboration between human and machine. And we do see this kind of like a lot with the human insight being applied to the machine learning or the machine analysis, really bringing out the best of both, that sort of symbiotic relationship.
Yeah.
So when you're, kind of when people are using these tools, what kind of advice do you give them to kind of get the most out of the machine learning? And also, what is it they should be trying to emphasize themselves if it's the first time they've done it?
I think specifically thinking of the tools that my colleagues sell at Accessible Intelligence, the way I like to kind of position it for people is to think of it like you've got a member of staff who is your analytics team. Not many charities are big enough to have an analytics team, and even a lot of charities that are very big don't have an analytics team. And so I think you can start by interrogating tools and systems in the way that you've kind of always wanted to, but not been able to. I think that one of the great things about many of the AIs being built into things like CRM systems is that they can provide you with answers that would have taken weeks. You'd have had to have written a data brief, waited for time to come up in the database team to get the kind of insight that you can now ask, and you can ask in kind of human language instead of database language. So I think there's something incredible there, and it's becoming more and more available across more and more tools. So smaller charities will inevitably be able to access tools like that, as well as larger organizations. And then with our tools, it allows you to just action that. It allows you to take to take that information and then to think about how you want to use it in ways, thinking about things like emotion or the issues that have been most engaging to people, ways that you just haven't been able to previously. I've built these long segmentation matrices in my career, where I've tried to brief in, ways of communicating to people in certain ways, or cutting the file up to be more efficient or something like that. And that is quickly becoming, a thing of the past. You can use these tools to automatically segment your audience, to automatically select who's going to get what, how you're going to talk to people about what you're going to talk to people about. And so I think there's numerous things you can then do as follow-on actions that make you more powerful than I was ever able to be as when I was a direct marketer back in the day, trying to come up with a direct mail list. And there's some good examples if you go out and look at, I think it may have been Parkinson's UK or Pancreatic Cancer UK, who've done this with their direct mail file, and they've made tens of thousands of pounds more than they were previously making on these direct mail appeals by applying exactly the same types of algorithm that we apply to your digital file to their direct mail file. So you're seeing these kind of things become more pervasive across programs, even thinking about more traditional kind of sticking a letter in the post kind of programs.
Yeah. It's the analysis can kind of happen centrally, and you can put a lot of high tech stuff on it, but then actually the intervention, the thing that then happens, can be really straightforward, I guess. Yeah. And it's all about what works for the audience, for the person.
Absolutely.
Receiving it. We've kind of been playing around a bit with predictive analytics, and kind of thinking about kind of the exam question we're most often set is around legacy giving, which is how do you do that? And we kind of run a range of different techniques, but what we try and do is develop a sort of a way of predicting and then validating against those results as to how well people have kind of responded to our prediction that they would become a legacy giver, or kind of like a higher donor, or someone likely to kind of churn. And then we kind of validate and we kind of move forward, and it's good, and it's kind of, I think, kind of a bit like you were saying about the direct mail. It's good, but it's rapidly being overtaken, and actually the tools are getting better, and we can start doing more and more. The way that we've kind of thought about segmenting emails and doing those journeys has just kind of been, it's almost like when we were doing it before, it was like in black and white, and now it's
Yeah.
full Technicolor, segmentation on new variables that you never saw before, and then content written that fits, and then sent, and then, kind of optimized and kind of worked through. It's a really exciting time, I think, to be working in communications overall, but especially in terms of third sector and fundraising and kind of delivering on kind of the promise of some of that change to further the organization's mission. When you're predicting donors or, kind of thinking about that stuff, is there anything from an ethical point of view that you would kind of call out as, a way to help people think about it the right way and not get into trouble and do the right thing?
Absolutely. So I think you want to make sure that your privacy statement is watertight and that you're telling people that you're going to be screening and performing kind of analysis using these kind of tools in that privacy statement. There's a number of charities that got in trouble probably 7 or 8 years ago now for doing wealth screening on their databases without declaring it in their privacy statement. So the sector's response to that probably means that most charities have covered themselves now, but you do want to check that. And then I think there are things, you touched on it earlier about the around discrimination, specifically in the UK and EU, where there are tighter laws than in markets like the US, around, looking at people and trying to make inappropriate kind of assumptions about them based on what the tools are saying. So, I'm very wary of tools that do things like say, oh, you live in Newcastle, so you probably don't have much money, so we'll ask you for a very small amount of money in a gift string, versus, oh, you live in central London, so you've probably got loads of money, so we'll ask you for a very high average gift, because that's making assumptions based on, where somebody lives, demographic profiling. And, I think that there are issues there that people will come unstuck, right, when somebody complains, and when a disability or another type of discrimination is identified by a regulator. I think what you say about legacy fundraising is very interesting, because legacy fundraising became far harder when the GDPR came in, and with the principle of data minimalization, a lot of people remove things like date of birth from databases. So I think there's a number of great lead indicators that you can use, based on the way somebody's behaving, the number of actions they've taken with you, that can have a tremendous impact. And when you think that, when I was in the sector, and we're talking about 3 or 4 years ago, the average residuary legacy gift was £34,000. You're talking about being able to have a transformative impact on a huge area of fundraising with a fairly minor kind of outlay in terms of spend on tools. So I guess if you're a charity with an audience profile that's, aging or certainly aging through their kind of 50s and 60s, if you're going to invest in one tool, you probably want to invest in a tool looking at legacy files, because 10 years from now, that's going to pay back very, very large amounts of money if you can start converting people, even at 1 or 2%. So there's probably a big impact you can have there.
It's always that piece of we always go on the good, better, best. Like demographics are good, behavior's better, best is intent, but best is hard to get sometimes. So it's if you just knew everyone who was planning on writing a will, then you would know that that would be ideal. And then kind of really, I think that asymmetry of this, it can be quite a small investment and yet lead to these big results. And all of a sudden, when you're looking at across everything that a charity does, it can be truly transformative. And often one of the challenges we find is that not just that, oh, I don't know what to do to start, but actually with the leadership team, that they can kind of not know what sequence to do things in as well. And it's, fundraising, I think, is always going to be near the front of the queue because it's so important to keep the show on the road. But I think kind of all of a sudden that sort of lightning bolt moment from earlier when you said that any form of new transformation or innovative technology could become a recruiter for extra fundraising, then again kind of flips it around on its head.
Absolutely. And I think obviously the first place people go to is kind of trust and foundation fundraising. There's actually very small numbers of trusts and foundations in the UK that'll fund technology and technology platform purchases. I think the private sector, though, thinking of kind of corporate money, I think there'd be real excitement for investment in kind of AI tools that can transform a charity's services or impact. You think of kind of tech companies in the UK are an obvious source of funding for that. But I think given just how popular the subject is at the moment, even corporates that don't have an immediate alignment with artificial intelligence may very well be looking for things that feel new and innovative and different to put money behind. So when people approach supermarkets, they're a really common big funder in the UK charity sector. They're going to want to appear to be on the cutting edge, to be innovative, to be looking at how they can make bigger social impact. So even people like that, I'd imagine, will respond really, really well to AI tools or innovative ways of delivering services if you're putting a funding application together through the corporate team.
Yeah, a little bit. I think sometimes with digital, it kind of goes in phases, doesn't it? But you get that sort of magic dust effect of, it's a new thing going on. And of course, like social impact, something that we spend a lot of time thinking about as an impact innovator, this sort of idea of big ideas, bold technology, better tomorrow, working through with partners to kind of solve these big social problems. And kind of, I think that piece of advice is golden. And one that, I don't think is explored enough when people are thinking about it, that actually you could kind of pull together a group of different stakeholders around the table, design something that's really good, that achieves social good, and then, can kind of be delivered through various different ways.
Absolutely. I think what charities then do, and I imagine this is true of all organizations, is they get into the annual cycle and they, you keep doing the same thing because you've always done it. And I think that the instinct to do that becomes stronger as charities are under pressure, as maybe the head count isn't what it once was. But I think people need to resist that temptation right now, especially, and think about ways that they can break the mold and innovate. Because there's a transformative change happening in the world of tech. But I think charities are also undergoing an extremely difficult kind of moment that will go on for a while, where their audience is fundamentally changing. The regular donors, the people that are aging out of fundraising programs now, have held charities up for years. You're talking about from the advent of direct debit giving through the late 80s, the 90s, the 2000s, and the 2010s. People have relied on, the greatest generation boomers, people who've set up regular donations and are very, very amenable to a legacy ask. That world is changing. The average, I've spoken to charities whose average member is nearly 80 years old now.
Wow.
The average age of death in the UK is 81. So there's going to be a fundamental change in the fundraising program, and you're going to be engaging an audience who have different expectations. So people who expect more personalized communication, people who've grown up, with things like Amazon recommending very, very particular products to them, people who expect value for money back from the money that they're spending, who are far more technologically aware than the previous generation. So there's a real change happening, and these aren't people who are as likely to just give philanthropically. There isn't as much money. They've waited longer to have kids. They've waited longer to buy a house. So there isn't the kind of disposable income that the charities have kind of dined out on for a long time. So there's a real inflection point happening in the world of tech, but also in the charity fundraising sector that I think people need to respond to. And ironically, the tech can probably help make that change a little bit more palatable for organizations.
It is interesting, isn't it? We keep on seeing this idea that AI is social change, not technological change. And you always, I kind of think, well, there was no minister for spreadsheets. There was no kind of big governmental response, whereas AI has kind of triggered this change. And it seems that, ironically, it's got the ability to let us lean into more human aspects by just delegating more work to the machines. But that in itself will kind of trigger social change. Do you think there's wider learnings here for those sectors that are not classic third sector, but actually fundraising is increasingly becoming part of their world? So I'm thinking in my mind's eye, the arts, for instance, where there's a greater need to look for philanthropic fundraising. What's your take on that, and how will that kind of affect the classic charity model?
Absolutely. I think first, it will likely make the sector more competitive. So there's going to be more competition between organisations for probably slightly less money, if we're being honest. I think if you're looking at organisations that need to start fundraising, need to start thinking about new ways of generating income, I think there's a huge amount they can learn from the charity sector in terms of what the charity sector didn't do well for a long time and is now scrambling to get better at. I think the big thing for me, as somebody who's done a lot of mass market fundraising, has been the need for charities to get better at stewardship and keeping donors giving. And it's something that I think the charity sector had a multi-decade head start on the private sector in. But ironically, the private sector, as they've moved towards more and more subscription products, have kind of shown the charity sector how you keep somebody, paying or giving for through a subscription. The charity sector, when I got into it, I was involved in debates with people that were saying maybe you don't even send out stewardship materials because it reminds people that they're giving to you and they might cancel the gift.
Really? That's a totally different way of thinking about it.
Totally different way of thinking about it, but also a terrible indictment of the charity's communications as well, right? Because you should be inspiring people and making people feel positive about what they're doing and what they're contributing towards. And so I'd say if you're starting to explore fundraising, be it at low or high value, think about stewardship and think about building those relationships in like meaningful ways, and ways that demonstrate to somebody the social good or the positive aspects of what they're doing. The reason that years ago I remember going to a talk and people talked about the different emotions that charities tried to elicit from supporters, and they found that it was very easy to get kind of a quick one-off donation from somebody with some really difficult negative messaging. So if you think back to when I was a kid, you'd see lots of Oxfam adverts that showed, the terrible conditions people were living in around the world, and they don't do that anymore. And it's because really what the charity sector found was that you could guilt people into giving a very small one-off donation very easily, but they wouldn't repeat that support. Whereas if you went to people with a message of hope and demonstrated impact and the positive change that you could have in somebody's life, you were then able to get people to contribute more money, but to do it at regular intervals. So I think there's another great learning there for people. Focus on the impact you're having and the difference you're making, as well as referencing the need. That will keep people giving. It will allow you to build stronger stewardship programs. And that stewardship, regardless of whether you're a charity, if you're in the arts, if you're working for your background, Adam, if you're working for a political party, it will keep motivating people and it'll get people to do things for you, to attend events, to give more, to fundraise on your behalf, and to go and find new supporters.
In the way that all websites are going to disappear and we'll have nothing but APIs, with AIs reading them, I do believe that everything's going to end up a membership organization sooner or later. And it was funny you should mention that as you were kind of like heading towards that. I was like, oh yeah, of course. During the pandemic, when Pret moved to like Club Pret and your coffee became part of that. But I think kind of, again, you've really hit upon this issue that as the technology gets there, I think technological difference becomes less of a competitive advantage. And if you kind of wave the magic wand and everyone had this kit fully deployed, what would be the difference? I think it will be that sense of genuine human connection and, doing something that people feel worthwhile on. We've kind of added a new section into the mini MBAI, which is, it's short and sweet, but it's just called AI Social Stewardship. And it just kind of gives people some tools, some concepts to kind of navigate it. We kind of talk about things like vision. So kind of like, how do you set the tone of what you want to do, down to the practical level of what does that actually mean when you're trying to select a tool. But also things like the impact that you have, as you say, kind of like the so what moment of, well, it's great, but will it actually achieve what you were trying to do? And not just kind of like the outcome, but that wider not output, but outcome that kind of has people in there. I have some rapid fire questions for you.
Go for it.
Are you ready? Some of these are a little bit more, I had some normal ones and I said, give me 5 more viral and spicy questions. Okay. So they're off the wall. They are off the wall. So, okay. Do you see a day where AI powered facial recognition is the future of being greeted as you walk in the door of a charity shop?
Gosh, it's not going to happen very quickly, but I guess it might.
That's the next one's absolutely bonkers. Do you think there will be AI generated deepfakes being used in personalized charity giving? So people got a direct message from perhaps an ambassador or a patron, and kind of, it's a great idea and it could tell a powerful story, but deepfakes, is that okay?
I don't think it's okay, but I can see an era when it does get used. I went to I know these are meant to be rapid fire, but I'm going to a slight tangent. So I went to I Wish I Thought of That conference last year, and someone presented a charity campaign that had been created completely by an AI. And there's a film that came out years ago called, I think it's Wag the Dog, where the incumbent president in America is in a bit of electoral trouble, so he gets a director to fake a war for him to buoy his popularity. And I thinking of that, I am concerned that fraud might become a significant issue, where organizations pretend to be charities and can deep fake a natural disaster and raise a large amount of money before authorities can shut them down. And so I think that although I can see a period where it could be used in fun and positive ways, I can also see a need for government to step in and legislate around some of this stuff, because there are risks that people who may not be as aware of what's going on both technologically and in the world could be duped by somebody. All it would take is one person with the right tools creating a fake payment page and a fake natural disaster.
We've certainly seen there's an arms race out there, and this information or this technology is available to everyone, and not everyone's going to use it as ethically. So no, that's a really considered response, and I think kind of opens up another side. There is these tools are powerful and can be used for good. They can also be used for bad, as most things are, but this has that power. Do you think we'll ever get to the point where AI could begin to predict people who are going to leave charity, or kind of before it happens, before they realize it themselves?
So we're within the Accessible Intelligence platform, we're testing that at the moment. In fact, I believe there's a charity gone live with it in the last couple of days. When we tested it, we could predict donors who were going to lapse at a fairly impressive rate, and that's without having deployed it with a large panel of charities yet. I think that there's patterns of behavior, right? A lot of this will be based on patterns of behavior that can tell people, firstly, we mentioned legacies. Is somebody likely to be open to the conversation of becoming a legator? You can easily, I think, predict that based on things like length of time on file, number of actions, the depth of the actions people are taking. But I think the flip side of that is being able to say, well, actually, these people have gradually become disengaged. They've stopped responding to certain asks. And by looking at patterns of behavior over time there, you can probably segment people and say, okay, we need to put these people on like a reactivation journey or a strengthening journey where, you know, their support, where we really, really double down on why they started supporting us, why they might want to continue supporting us in the future, why it might be worth sending them something in the post, you know, something that feels a bit more valuable. So I think there's a definite future in looking at you know, risk of lapsing tools.
Will AI make us, all of us fundraisers, unemployed by 2030?
No. So I like you said earlier, I think the real power of AI is as a colleague, essentially, as a tool that can help you be better at your job in multiple different ways. I think that the role will change by 2030. I think that people need to be looking at how they prompt tools. They need to be thinking about training themselves or getting training on using and getting the most value out of these kinds of tools. And so I think fundamentally fundraising, like many jobs, is going to be changing in a big way over the next 5 years. But I'm much more inclined to look at this like the Industrial Revolution, when it changed when it changed what work was. I think combined with a number of other things where people can work from, and work really effectively from. So I think it'll change the nature of work. I don't think it'll change, you know, the patterns of work in that everybody sat in their homes worried about how they're going to pay their bills versus the AI is doing everything for us.
I mean, that could be a utopia. You never know.
Could be.
That is amazing. Thank you very much for all of that, Paul. It's always wonderful to kind of hear what's going on from an expert in their field and how AI is actually shaping up on the ground. Before we close, if there's any questions from our audience, please just drop them in the chat, and we'll put Paul on the spot even more. But otherwise, we will be we'll be releasing this as part of our regular series of AI and great people. We've yet to come up with a name, so that's work in progress. We should ask AI for that, I feel. But yeah, Paul, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Adam.
Yeah, and we'll speak soon.
Definitely. Thank you very much.
Cool. Thanks all for attending.